Hi, this is Dr. E again, and welcome to the second biology video notes. Today I am wearing my Winnie the Pooh tie because I'm hoping it will give me good luck as I try to give these notes to you today. This unit is called The Characteristics of Life. Today's video, we will talk about the characteristics of life that we identified in the lab that we are doing called the yeast of our worries. So let's begin. As most of you know, biology is the study of life. So what would be the obvious first question somebody would want to ask? Exactly right. They would want to know, well, what is life? Well, despite all the knowledge, all the volumes and volumes and volumes of facts that we know about biology, scientists have a very difficult time defining what life is. You saw when I showed you three pictures of objects and told you two out of three were living and one wasn't, the class disagreed on what the two living things were. So it's not that easy to determine what is living and what is not living all the time. So what scientists do is they create a list of characteristics that all living things should possess. If a living thing is missing just one of those characteristics, then it's not a living thing. It's got to possess every single one of these characteristics. Now, if you were to Google the characteristics of life, you would get tons and tons of links. And if you were to go to those links, what you would find out is some say there are 5 characteristics of life, some say there are 7 characteristics of life, some say there are 9 characteristics of life. And if you were to read these characteristics, they may not be the same from list to list because people or scientists disagree on what defines life. In our class, we're going to use 9 characteristics of life. So let's begin. The first characteristic of life from experiment 1 was all living things obtain energy from their environment and use energy. The source of energy is found in your food. Food also serves as building blocks or raw material for building more of you. So, how did you get bigger? You're not the same size that you were when you were a baby, you're much bigger. Somehow or other, you had to add more stuff to make you bigger. Well, the stuff comes from food. It's food that adds to you that makes you bigger. So, in a sense, you could say you are made of food. All right, but let's get back to food as a source of energy. What your body and cells do is they break down this food to release the energy that's stored in the food. Well, what do you need this energy for anyway? Well, you need it to grow, you need it to reproduce, you need it to respond to stimuli, you need it to maintain homeostasis, and most importantly, you need it to maintain organization of your cells, how the cells are arranged together, and how the organelles within cells are organized. Think of your room. How do you keep it neat and organized? Well, that takes work and that takes effort. And work requires energy. So you need to put in a lot of energy to keep your room organized. The same for a cell. If you don't keep putting energy in to maintain the cell's organization, then the cell becomes disorganized and the cell dies. The ultimate source of energy for most living things on Earth comes from the sun. Autotrophs, or producers, are organisms that are able to create their own food. For example, plants. They're able to convert light energy from the sun to chemical energy and store that chemical energy in food in a process called photosynthesis. Heterotrophs, or consumers, are organisms that obtain their food by eating other organisms. They cannot make their own food. The process that breaks down the food, whether it's an autotroph or a heterotroph, they both have to break down food. For autotrophs, they make the food in photosynthesis. The heterotrophs get the food by eating it, but in either case, they both have to break down the food to release the energy stored in food so they could use it for those activities. That process is called cell respiration. In experiment 2, you identified a characteristic of life called reproduction. Reproduction is absolutely essential for the survival of a species because living things don't live forever. You have to replace yourself. However, not every member of a species needs to reproduce. That kind of makes reproduction a unique characteristic of life, since it's the only characteristic that not every member has to perform. Reproduction passes on your genetic material to your offspring. There are two types of reproduction: sexual reproduction and asexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction involves two different cells, a sperm cell and an egg cell from two different parents, and these cells unite to form the first cell of the new organism. This first cell of the new organism is called a zygote. Since the new organism is formed by the mixing of genetic material of two different individuals, sexual reproduction produces variation. And variation is very important in the process of evolution. Asexual reproduction involves only one individual. Since there is no mixing of genetic material, all the offspring are identical, so there's no variation. Reproduction requires a lot of energy. In the third experiment, you identified growth and development as a characteristic of life. All organisms begin life as one cell and then grow. Multicellular organisms, which are organisms made up of more than one cell, grow by dividing cells to make more cells by the process of mitosis. So you grow because cells are dividing by mitosis within you. So you're bigger today than you are as a baby, not because your cells are bigger, but because you have a lot more cells than you did when you were a baby. Growing also requires energy. The changes that an organism goes through in its lifetime is known as development. So, for example, an insect begins as an egg, then becomes a larva, then becomes a pupa, and then becomes an adult. These changes that it goes through are known as development. Some cells change into nerve cells, some cells change into bone cells, and some cells change into nerve cells. This development into these specialized cells is known as differentiation. These cells are changing into cells that have very special functions. Thus, differentiation leads to specialized cells. However, all cells in your body have the same identical DNA, same type, same amount, absolutely 100% identical. So how do cells differentiate into specialized cells if the DNA, the instructions, are the same for every cell? Well, the answer is in each different cell, different genes are turned on or turned off so different cells don't get the same instructions. All right, let's check for understanding. Why do organisms require food? For two reasons. They need it for energy. They extract energy out of food, and they use the food as building blocks for making more of themselves. How do autotrophs obtain their food? Well, autotrophs make or create their own food, usually through a process called photosynthesis. How do heterotrophs obtain their food? Well, they obtain the food by going out and eating other organisms because heterotrophs cannot make their own food. Ultimately, what is the source of energy for Earth's creatures? Ultimately, the source of energy is sunlight. What process extracts energy from food for use? That process would be cell respiration. What process makes food by capturing energy in sunlight and converting it to chemical energy stored in food? That would be photosynthesis. What happens if you lack the energy to maintain cell organization? You die, or your cells die. Why is reproduction essential? Because living things don't live forever, so they have to replace themselves. What is passed to offspring by the process of reproduction? Your genetic information is passed to your offspring through reproduction. Compare and contrast the two types of reproduction. We have sexual reproduction and we have asexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction requires two individuals, a cell from one individual, the sperm, a cell from the other individual, the egg, unite to form the first cell of the new organism, the zygote. Since each individual is contributing genetic information, the genetic information is mixed, thus creating variation, which again is important for evolution. In asexual reproduction, only one individual is involved, so there's no mixing of genetic material, so the offspring will be identical. Does reproduction require energy? Yes, 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 yes. Lots of energy. Do all cells within an organism have identical DNA? The answer is yes. All the cells in your body have the same exact DNA. How do cells differentiate into specialized cells if DNA is identical? Because in each different cell, different genes are on and different genes are off. So you're getting different instructions in different types of cells. And lastly, does growing and developing require energy? The answer is, what is it? The answer is yes. All right, have a good night.